Chapter 1. Gideon headed into the office at the McClain boys' ranch to see his brother. Well, really, he went there to see Brittany, but he would say he needed to see Adam so she wouldn't realize he still carried a torch for her, if carrying a torch was still a thing. Maybe he just had feelings for her. Whatever it was, he liked to be around her, and he wanted to ask her out, but he knew she'd shoot him down. When he got into the office, he saw Brittany sitting at the desk with her back to him. He felt waves of sadness and desperation wash off her, and he frowned. His Brittany was always happy and teasing him, and he could rarely feel her emotions. "You all right?" he asked. She turned, swiping away at a tear that was coursing down her cheek. "Yeah, great." He walked over to her and sat in the chair in front of her desk. "Britt, it's me. Tell me what's wrong." She took a deep breath. "I think we're going to lose our house. I didn't know there were back taxes to be paid, so I haven't paid them, and I just got a letter saying that we have to be out in 15 days so the house can be sold." She grabbed a Kleenex from her desk and blew her nose. Gideon had been one of her very best friends since junior high. They'd gone out for a couple of months in high school, but he'd broken up with her suddenly with no explanation. They'd managed to remain friends. "I have no idea how this has slipped through the cracks for so long, and I've been paying them every year, but I can't pay the back taxes. I just don't have the money." Gideon wrapped his mind around the problem quickly and logically, forcing himself not to feel her emotions. Normally he couldn't feel her emotions, but today, they were washing over him in waves. He'd always been drawn to Brittany in a way he had been no other woman, in the way men in his family were only supposed to feel about their destined bride. Maybe she wasn't the one meant for him, but she was the one he wanted. "Marry me." Brittany gaped at him with shock on her face. "Excuse me?" There's no way he could have just told her to marry him. He'd dumped her. "You know, in my family, it's the youngest who inherits the house as soon as he marries. I'm the youngest. There's a huge house waiting for me within a 5-minute walk from this office. Marry me, and there will be a place for you, Madison and Caden. You can't just ask me to marry you, so we'll have a place to stay." That's crazy. Madison and Caden were her younger siblings she had been raising since she graduated from high school. They were both teenagers now, and the overwhelming responsibility was enough to make her buckle from the pressure. Her friendship with Gideon kept her going. Gideon shrugged. "I can if I want to." He reached out and took her hand in his. "You've always been my closest friend. There's something special between us, and there has been since the day we met. If we marry, I can help you the way I want to help. Please." Brittany bit her lip. "But that's crazy. I know all your brothers are marrying fast and furiously, but that doesn't mean you have to." The man had to have inhaled something he shouldn't have on the way there. He studied her for a moment. "Let me take you to lunch today, and we'll talk. Please. I need to be able to present my case." She felt a giggle bubbling up. "Present your case? Are you an attorney now?" He sighed. "Why do I even talk to you?" She made him crazy at times, but he knew it was just because he loved her so much. "Because I'm your friend. Lunch today. I'll pick you up. Diner in town? Or do you want to get all crazy and drive to nowhere for lunch and eat at the diner there?" "Diner in Bagley is fine." Britton grinned at him. "You always make me feel better, even if you do come up with crazy schemes." Gideon shook his head at her as he headed into Adam's office. Adam was the oldest of the McClain brothers, who were all named for the brothers from 7 Brides for 7 Brothers. He knocked once, not waiting for a response, and let himself in. Dropping into the chair across from Adam's desk, he waited for his brother to look up from his paperwork to pay attention to him. "Yes?" Adam asked. "I just asked Brittany to marry me," Gideon said, expecting to shock his brother. "It's about time." We've all been waiting for it. Adam leaned back in his chair, studying his brother. What took you so long? I've been waiting for my destined bride. I thought that's what I was supposed to do. He looked back toward the front, even though Brittany was blocked from view. Do you think she even wants to have 7 sons? That's for you to talk out with her. What did she say? She laughed at me. Told me I didn't have to marry her. I'm taking her to lunch today, and she's going to hear the whole destiny thing, including my role in it all. Good. She needs to know before you marry her. You shouldn't have even asked until you told her everything. Adam shook his head. Gideon frowned at Adam. Am I allowed to tell her everything? You all told your brides, because you knew they were destined to be yours. Can I do that with Brittany? Adam blinked a few times, shocked at his brother's questions. You know Brittany is meant to be your bride, right? I mean, everyone else knows, so we assumed you did, too. Well, I know I've been in love with her since she whacked me over the head with a stack of books in junior high. I didn't know we were destined. Did Dad tell you? Adam nodded. But even if he hadn't, you two are obviously meant to be together. I'm surprised you're even questioning it. Gideon sat back down, frowning. So you think I'm free to tell her everything? You don't think she'll run away screaming? She's been working for this office for 8 years. If she hasn't figured out there's a little bit of something unusual going on with our family, then she's even denser than you are. Gideon sighed heavily. I guess I am dense. He looked at Adam, his head tilted to one side. Think I can convince her to marry me? If we want the McClains to continue, I sure hope so. Adam made a shooing motion. Find someone else to bug. I have to work. Gideon made a face at his brother, but he stood up and left his office. Adam was the ranch psychiatrist, and he had a lot of paperwork to do all the time. Gideon was just the ranch Gideon. He was more a jack of all trades and a master of none. He headed to the main house, needing a quick chat with his dad. Was what Adam had said true? Adam wasn't usually one to lie to him, but all of his brothers loved to harass him every chance they got. This may just be more of his usual teasing. He walked into the house, calling out, Mom, Dad. It's me. He'd moved back into the house a couple of weeks before, because his brother Frank had married, and he and Lonnie, his new wife, were living in the house with the boys. This was where he'd end up anyway. He'd always known it. His mother came out of the kitchen. You and your brothers never learned not to yell when you came in the house. We always yell after that time Caleb came in and found you two kissing like crazy people. We're afraid of what we'll see if we don't yell. His mother gave him a mom look. What do you need, Gideon? Even though he lived there again, he wasn't often in the house during the day. He was out working on the ranch. He had a feeling he was going to hear those words repeatedly all day. I would like to talk to Dad, if I may. He's in his study. His mother disappeared back into the kitchen. She spent a lot of time cooking. Sometimes it was sweets for the boys on the ranch. Sometimes it was dinner for the family. Sometimes it was a huge barbecue supper for everyone that lived on the ranch. Gideon knocked once and walked in, taking a seat across from his father's desk. He felt like he was shuffling around from office to office today, but he didn't mind. He knew his place on this ranch, and he had no insecurities about it. Hey, Dad. His father smiled. What's my only unmarried son doing in my office? Shouldn't you be out scouring the world for the girl who will give your mother 7 grandsons, all more precious than the first? I asked Brittany to marry me today, Gideon said, watching his father's face carefully. It's about time. That's what Adam said. Gideon couldn't believe that everyone in the family had expected them to marry. Everyone but him. How had everyone seen it when he couldn't? He had more powers than any of the others. His dad shrugged. I knew you'd marry her back when you came home talking about how she'd hit you in junior high. I just didn't think you were ready for that knowledge. When the two of you dated in high school, I worried a bit that you'd marry before either of you were ready, but it's time. I'm going to tell her everything at lunch today. You don't mind, do you? Not at all. I really think she knows some of it. She works too closely with Adam not to know he at least has a greater understanding of others' emotions than most people. She may not realize he's a full-fledged empath, but honestly, I wouldn't be terribly surprised if she did. Gideon shrugged. If she doesn't realize it now, she will in a few hours. I'm taking her to the diner in town, and I'm going to tell her everything and ask her to marry me again. Why did you randomly ask her to marry you? You two haven't been seeing each other, have you? Gideon shook his head. No, but I went to see Adam this morning. You went to see Brittany this morning, and you used Adam as an excuse. Whatever. I went to the office this morning, and Brittany had been crying. Normally I can't feel her emotions, but I felt waves of emotions washing toward me. So I asked her about it, and she's about to lose her house. She didn't realize her parents hadn't paid their property taxes in a few years, so she doesn't know what they're going to do. We'll help her if we need to, but I agree. It's time to tell her everything and marry her. You probably should have done it before, but since you didn't, it's really time now. All right. Then that's what I'm doing. Today, even. I'll tell your mother it's time for us to start packing up. The old house on the edge of the ranch is waiting for us, and I've had my eye on an RV for a while. I want to get out and travel the country. It's time. Gideon grinned. Sounds like you're ready. I don't know if Brittany is ready to take on the task of Friday night barbecue. Oh, I think your mother will usually help. We won't be gone more than a week every month or so. And you know as well as I do that Claire will help. She's a fabulous cook. Gideon got to his feet. Now that he had a plan in place, he knew Ephraim was hoping for some help in the barn that day. Thanks, Dad. You're welcome. His father fumbled in his desk for a moment and pulled out a box. Give her this. It might help. Used to be your grandmother's. Gideon opened it up and saw an engagement ring that would stun Brittany. It was a diamond surrounded by tiny emeralds that would match her eyes perfectly. I'll do it. He ran between the big house and the barn, pleased with how that conversation had gone. He was going to ask Brittany to marry him after explaining all about their family, and hopefully she'd agree. He couldn't imagine a life without her in it. When he got to the barn, Ephraim grinned. Hey you. I was hoping you'd wander by today. What's up? For the next 2 hours, Gideon lost himself in work. He and Ephraim worked on 4 different animals. At 11:30, he frowned. I need to go get cleaned up for lunch. He was covered in blood, sweat, and dog urine. Even he knew better than to show up for a date dressed that way. Ephraim nodded at him. Go. Enjoy. Convince her that she's meant to be the mother of 7 children, one of whom will have a random magical power. Gideon made a face at his brother. You make it sound so delightful. I try. Ephraim frowned. I need to come up with a nickname for her. I'll work on that. I'm sure she'll be thrilled. You need me this afternoon? Ephraim shrugged. Nah. I think I can handle things. Ben's getting ready for growing season. April's only a week away. You might want to check with him. All right. Gideon raised a hand. Thanks for the work. And he was gone, running off toward the house where he now just worked, but no longer lived. It was strange not living with the boys, but he certainly understood the reasoning. He could still be there when they got home from school, and he would be, but he wouldn't be there at night any longer. When he arrived, he stood there for a moment. Why did I come here instead of running home? Now I'm going to be late. He wasn't used to living in the big house anymore, and he'd run to where he was used to living by sheer force of habit. He took off toward the big house, running in the front door and straight up the stairs with no word to anyone. He ran into his room, showered and changed, and ran out the door to his truck, which he drove the short distance to the office to save a bit of time. He walked in to find Brittany still working. "You're late," she said without looking up. "I forgot I was living in the big house again, and I ran to the house where Frank lives with the boys." "I know that's stupid, but it's the truth." Brittany sighed. "What are we going to do with you, Gideon McClain?" "Marry me?" he asked again. She rolled her eyes, grabbed her purse, and followed him out the door. "I hope you're paying, because I'm broke till Friday. Teenagers eat more than gorillas, I think." Gideon opened her door for her, and then ran around to the other side of the truck. "I don't know how much gorillas eat." "I don't either," Brittany said, "but I imagine it's a lot, and I know my teens eat a lot more than what I imagine a gorilla would eat." Gideon just nodded at her. They were very comfortable together usually, and he was glad it seemed to be slipping back to that while they drove toward town. He needed to convince her to marry him, but maybe they could be friends for a few more minutes before he threw a wrench into everything. Chapter 2. Gideon parked in front of the small diner, running around the truck to open her door for her. Of course, he'd been opening doors for her for 15 years or more, and neither of them thought a thing of it. Once they were sitting in the diner, Miss May brought them their menus. "What are you doing here, Gideon? You only come when chicken fried steak is the special." She frowned at him as if she thought he was up to something sneaky. Of course, she'd known him since he was a toddler, so she had reason to think so. Gideon shrugged. A man can change his ways. "What's the special today?" "Salisbury steak, mashed potatoes, salad, and your choice of side." Miss May looked at him expectantly. "Dr. Pepper?" He nodded. "Always." "I'll have a sweet tea," Brittany said, leaning back against the booth. "When we were kids, you always got a Coke," he said. "What changed?" She shrugged. "I couldn't afford to have Coke at home all the time, so I learned to drink tea. Cheaper and just as caffeine-y." Is caffeine a word? Is now. Miss May pushed their drinks in front of them. "What else?" "I'll have the special," Gideon said. He didn't really care what he ate when he was so nervous about the discussion they were about to have. "Me too," Brittany said, pushing the menus toward Miss May. "Thank you." Miss May winked at her and hurried away. "So, I brought you here so we could have a real talk." Brittany frowned at him. "I'm listening." "Have you noticed anything odd about my family?" he asked, taking a drink of the Dr. Pepper. She shrugged. "The whole town has. You always have 7 sons in every generation, the 7th son inherits, and that son always has 7 more sons. It's a bit strange." He grinned. "Yeah, that's kind of obvious to everyone. Have you noticed anything else?" She thought about it for a moment, not sure where this was going, but she'd play his game if that's what he wanted. "Adam seems to be more in touch with other people's emotions than most men." "Yeah, he does, doesn't he?" He took a deep breath. "Well, I'm about to tell you our big family secret that only people who were born into our family or who will marry into our family know." She leaned forward. "You know where Jimmy Hoffa is buried?" He blinked a couple of times. "Unfortunately, no. This secret has nothing to do with Jimmy Hoffa." She frowned. "Well, that's disappointing." He sighed. "Can I tell you the real secret now? Or are we obsessed with Jimmy Hoffa?" "I guess I can listen." "And why are you telling me?" "Because you need to know." He cleared his throat, really wishing she hadn't thrown him off his game with the Jimmy Hoffa stuff. He'd practiced what he was going to say to her, and now everything in his head had just flown out the window. Our family is born of the seventh son as far back as anyone can tell. Each seventh son has 7 sons, and the seventh son in each generation has something special. Special? You mean like he has a 6th toe on his left foot? Have I ever seen your feet? Brittany frowned at him. Take off your boot and sock and let me see your left foot. He frowned at her. Believe it or not, I'm very serious about this conversation. Has that ever happened before? Anyway, the 7th son has something very special. My dad is a precog, meaning he knows things before they happen. Gideon looked at her waiting for a response. She shrugged. Doesn't totally surprise me. Why does Adam seem to have something special as well? He's the firstborn in the generation. You're the 7th. She leaned forward. Are you sure you won't show me your toes? Positive. He put his hand over hers, hoping she wouldn't push him away. Our generation is the 7th generation, and we all have special powers, if you will, and no, mine has nothing to do with having 6 toes on my left foot. She pouted at him, a bit disappointed. Fine. What's your power? Let me tell you my brother's first, because it will make more sense that way. Whatever makes you happy. Brittany sat back and drank her tea, wondering if there was money to be made in having a 6th toe on one foot. Adam is an empath. He feels the emotions of the people around him. She nodded. I can honestly see that. Not surprised at all. Benjamin has an affinity with plants and the land. He can grow things on command. She made a face. I know he's considered fabulous with plants, and they say his whole body is green and not just his thumb. That's why. Gideon was surprised she was taking this all so matter-of-factly. It was unusual in his experience. Caleb can sense danger, which is why he's such a daredevil. I wondered how he never got hurt. Brittany was starting to enjoy the conversation, really looking forward to knowing what Gideon's power was. Daniel can heal people with a touch. She grinned. I've heard stories that he could do that, but no one has any proof. That's probably for the best, Gideon said, smiling at her enthusiasm. Ephraim can talk to animals and heal them. Makes sense. The kids call him Dr. Dolittle a lot. Yeah, they love that he's so good with animals. Gideon grinned at her. Frank has a calming aura. If a fight's about to break out, he can go to the area, and no one remembers why they were angry. Ooh, that's a cool power. Too bad you didn't get that one. Gideon took a deep breath, getting ready to tell her about him, which was the hardest part of the conversation. I did. I have each power my brothers have, to a lesser degree. Her eyes widened. So you can make plants grow? She gestured to the single flower in a vase on the table. Make that one grow. I can't. It's silk. She reached out and touched it. It looks so real. He shook his head. Are you ever serious about anything, Brittany? She shrugged. You're serious enough for both of us. Well, there's another part to all of this. We all have women we're destined to marry. As soon as Adam met his girl, the others were set into motion. You've seen how we've all fallen in love and gotten married super fast. Sure. It's all anyone in town is talking about. Well, you're my destiny. I think I felt it in high school, and my emotions were overpowering me, so I broke it off with you. He frowned down at his hands. But I'm ready to marry you now. We'll do a good job with your brother and sister. She frowned at him. You can't marry me just because I'm your destiny. Why not? I know we're meant to be together, so we should just do it now. You won't have a place to live in 2 weeks, and I know you can't afford to buy a house with what you make. So you're telling me you want me to marry you and have 7 sons? Do I get any daughters? He shook his head. None at all. You'll have nieces, I'm sure, and you can even have granddaughters. But you will only have 7 sons. Miss May stopped at the table then, putting their food in front of them. Don't let this one talk you into running off to marry Brittany. His brothers have single-handedly taken care of the entire unmarried female population in Bagley. Don't let him take you. She smiled sweetly. Can I get you anything else? Refills on your drinks maybe? Brittany broke into hysterical giggles as the older woman walked away. She has your number, Gideon McClain. Gideon took her hand in his, feeling the electricity jump through his body. Every time he'd ever touched her had been the same. So he had made it a point not to touch her often. Please, Brittany. I want to spend the rest of my life with you. Brittany stared at him for a moment, doing her best to process everything he'd just said. I can't think on an empty stomach, she finally said, taking her fork and cutting into her steak. He took a deep breath. I was hoping for something more than that. Do you need a special proposal? Ephraim had to propose in front of a church full of people. I'll do that if you want. I'll take out a skywriter. Just let me eat, and then we'll talk. But if I'm late, you have to tell Adam where I am. He grinned at that. One of the advantages of you working for my family. Adam knows we're having this talk today. He does? He knows you're asking me to marry you? Brittany shook her head. If I say no, is it going to hurt my job? Of course not. You know us better than that. Gideon frowned at the thought of her saying no. He'd known her forever. He'd loved her forever. What would he do with the rest of his life without her? They were silent as they finished their meal. He had said he'd let her eat, and he was going to do just that. When they'd each eaten their last bite, he pushed his plate away, waiting for her to say something. He couldn't put himself out there again, waiting for her to knock him down. You broke my heart when you broke things off in high school. I thought we'd spend forever together, but I picked up the pieces. I've come to think of you as one of my very closest friends, if not the closest friend. I don't know if I'd survive it if you decided after a year or two that I wasn't the woman you wanted in your life. Brittany didn't look at him as she said the words, instead staring down at the table. I have 2 other mouths to feed now. I have to stay strong for them. I can't give up on life because you don't want me anymore. Gideon reached out and took both of her hands in his. That won't happen. As far back as my family has traced their history, there's never been a divorce. We won't be the first either. He looked down at their joined hands. I don't know what it'll take to convince you, but I want to marry you, to have children with you, to help you raise Madison and Caden. Please. She looked up at him, a tear in her eye that burned his heart. I need to think about it. He nodded, leaning to one side so he could dig the ring out of his pocket. He opened it and showed her. I got this from my dad today. It belonged to my grandmother. It's beautiful. She stared at the ring. Your dad knows what we're doing today? I think everyone who has ever had the name McClain knows what we're doing today. He didn't want to rush her, but he really needed an answer. I don't know how to convince you that I'd never hurt you. I don't either. She frowned at him. Would you want me to keep working after we married? He shrugged. In the beginning, that would be up to you. Once the babies started coming, you'd probably need to stay home with them. Or we could get a full-time nanny if you preferred. Or you could stay home, and we could have a full-time nanny. I'm not picky. Brittany couldn't imagine herself with 7 children, but it was Gideon. She couldn't imagine life without him either. If I said yes, would you be willing to marry fast? So we would have a place to go? He nodded. Of course. I don't think the McClains know of another way to marry. She nodded. You may have a point there. She closed her eyes for a moment, imagining what life would be like married to him. He may have a lot of magical powers, but her power was imagination. She could dream up what life would be like, and hope it would be that way. She spent a lot of time writing out her imaginings, but she'd never told anyone about them or showed them to anyone. Being able to stay home would suit her purposes beautifully. Finally, she opened her eyes, her mind made up. I'll marry you. You will? He felt happiness rising inside him. He was going to marry the woman he loved. Maybe she didn't love him yet, and that was okay. He had enough love to get them through. She nodded, a smile spreading across her face. I will. We need to tell the kids. Do you want me with you for that? She thought about it for a moment and shook her head. I don't think so. I'll tell them tonight, and you can tell your family. When do you want to marry? He asked, needing her to lock down a day, so it would be harder for her to back out. What's the waiting period in Texas? Do you know? 3 days. I've had 6 brothers get married quickly in the past few months. I know the waiting period as if it was etched on my brain forever. Brittany grinned. Why don't we get married at the barbecue on Friday night? I can carry bluebonnets for a bouquet. There's no prettier time to get married in Texas than the end of March. And maybe the beginning of April, because the bluebonnets are still in bloom. Sounds perfect. Gideon couldn't believe she'd finally agreed. He had never wanted anything in life as much as he wanted her. On the drive back to the ranch, he kept glancing over at her, not quite sure this was really happening. But she was sitting there wearing his ring. We have to stop by the big house on the way so we can tell Mom and Dad. Just don't get me in trouble with Adam. I haven't decided yet if I want to keep working or not. I won't let you get in trouble. In fact, he pressed a button on his steering wheel. Call Adam. An electronic voice came back. Calling Adam McClain. This is Adam. Adam, it's Gideon. I'm going to keep your administrative assistant for just a bit longer. I need to take her to the big house to tell Mom and Dad the good news. No problem. Congrats, Gideon. Thank you. He pushed the button to end the call. How was that? Perfect. She sat back and stared out the window, wondering if she was doing the right thing. Even with all the love she had for him, she was scared. Gideon McClain was a strong man, and she didn't want to lose herself as his wife. Chapter 3. When Gideon pulled up in front of the big house, he didn't immediately go inside. Instead, he turned to Brittany. I hope you know how happy you've made me. She smiled at him. I'm glad. And she was. As her best friend, she wanted him to be happy, but she knew she'd be guarding her heart. He unfastened his seat belt and leaned toward her, cupping her face in his hands. You've always been the most beautiful woman in my world. With those words, he lowered his mouth to hers, kissing her for the first time in almost a decade. The old feelings came rushing back quickly, making him feel as if he was being washed away by them. When he raised his head, her lashes were still down, veiling her eyes from him. For some reason, I've always had a hard time reading your emotions. I have no idea why, but only you. I'm glad. I don't want you to know how I'm feeling. Well, I got an inkling today when you were so upset. Maybe your emotion has to be really powerful for me to feel it. She vowed then, to try to keep her emotions in check. She didn't want to be read by him. Ever. Let's go tell Lillian and Peter the good news. I'm sure they already know. Dad's a precog, remember? He got out of the car and ran around to her side. What exactly is a precog? Sorry. I forgot not everyone knows the lingo. Precog means someone who has precognitions. He can see the future before it happens. Brittany nodded, looking impressed. That's really cool. I want to learn to do that. I don't think it's something that can be learned. He took her hand and walked toward the house with her, so happy to be taking her home to his parents. Mom, Dad. I'm here. His mother came out of the kitchen. Gideon, you have to stop, she grinned. Brittany. She walked over and hugged the younger woman, obviously happy to see her. How did you escape from Adam in the middle of the day? Gideon grinned, realizing then his father hadn't talked to her. I talked Adam into letting me take her to lunch. He took Brittany's left hand and held it up to his mother. We want to marry during the barbecue on Friday night. Lillian gasped, hugging Brittany again. It's a lot of responsibility being married to the seventh son, but I have to say, my Gideon is worth it. He's such a good man. Brittany smiled at that. I'm excited to have you for a mother-in-law. We need to talk about the wedding. You want to do it at the barbecue this Friday, but do you want casual? Brittany nodded. I think I want to carry bluebonnets, and I want Madison to stand up with me. What do you want me to serve for the meal? I can do anything. And do you want to get a cake from a bakery in town? Or do you want Claire and I to bake it for you? Gideon grinned at the way his mother just immediately started volunteering the services of his sister-in-law. Give her a minute to think, Mom. We've been engaged less than an hour. Hush, you. Lillian turned back to Brittany. We'll start packing up immediately. Are you going to keep working? I think it might be hard for you to work, but for now it's up to you. It would be nice if you could take over the Friday night barbecues. It was in that moment that Brittany realized the enormity of what she'd agreed to. I hadn't thought about taking those over. I'll help you at first, but I know you and Claire will do just fine. Lillian took Brittany over to the table. Do you want me to shop for a wedding dress with you? Brittany frowned. I think I can wear my mom's. There was no way she could afford a wedding dress on such short notice. She wouldn't have been able to afford one if she'd had a year to save. All right. I was at your mother's wedding, and her dress was beautiful. Lillian stood up and went to get a notebook from the kitchen. Let's make a list of everything you want so we don't miss anything. Gideon frowned at them. I don't feel like I'm needed here. Lillian waved him away. Go fill in for Brittany for a bit. See if Adam needs anything. We'll work on planning the wedding. Tell Adam she won't be back today. Gideon nodded, going off to do what he was told. He walked to the office and went inside. Adam's door was open, so he went to his brother. Mom said she's keeping Brittany for the rest of the day, and if you need anything, I'll have to do it. Adam laughed. I'm not at all surprised, and if you are, you don't know our mother. When's the wedding? During the barbecue on Friday night. She wants to carry bluebonnets, but that's the only thing she's given an opinion on so far. Mom will get the rest out of her. He glanced up. Tiffany. Brittany's taking the rest of the afternoon off. Oh. I was just going to ask her to run to town. The printer has a new form he's printed for me so I can send it to the vendors for the fundraiser. I guess I'll have to go. Nope. Mom is giving us Gideon to take Brittany's place for the rest of the day. Maybe for the rest of the week. Gideon and Brittany are getting married at the barbecue Friday night. Tiffany squealed. That's wonderful. I was hoping it would be her for you. Brittany is going to be my sister. Adam shrugged at Gideon. I think she's happier getting all these new sisters than she's ever been about being married to me. Tiffany laughed softly. You know as well as I do that's not true. She handed Gideon a piece of paper. That's what you need to give the printer. He'll give you my stuff. She bit her lip for a second. And would you get me a beef potato burrito and 2 tacos from Taco Bueno? Adam shook his head. You can't be hungry already. Tiffany just looked at him. I lost my breakfast for the 3rd day in a row. I'm eating for 2. I'm going to have tacos. Gideon grinned. I'm an uncle. Adam frowned at her. We said we weren't telling anyone yet. Gideon isn't just anyone. He's the seventh son of a seventh son. Adam just shook his head. Yeah. He's special, all right. He looked at his brother. Don't tell anyone, and get me a combination burrito and a large Dr. Pepper. I feel like the errand boy, not the administrative assistant. Trust me, we send Brittany on her share of errands. Just do it and hope she comes back tomorrow. She has a whole house to pack up, you know. Gideon groaned, getting to his feet. Mom's going to be impossible to be around, knowing there are 2 grandbabies on the way. She's been bad enough since Kevin has announced that Bridget is pregnant. What had he gotten himself into here? He thought he might have to answer a phone call or 2, but instead, he was off running errands. Why didn't he get to sit around and talk about what he wanted for the wedding? As soon as the thought crossed his mind, he shuddered. He'd be perfectly content to just run errands. Color swatches and cake toppers meant nothing to him. Asterisk. When Brittany got home from work that day, the kids were both off in their rooms. Their house was small. They'd never had much money, but it was the only home she'd ever known. She called her siblings out. Madison. Caden. We need to talk. They both emerged from their rooms, with perplexed looks on their faces. Normally, if they did their chores, she didn't bother them too much. Sit. They exchanged a look with each other before sitting down. If this is about me putting a frog in the green jello at lunch today, I'm sorry. It was a dare, and I made $15. Caden blurted out quickly. Brittany blinked at her brother. I hadn't heard about a frog in the green jello yet, but I'll look forward to that phone call. She shook her head. No, this is something totally different. I'm getting married to Gideon McClain. Caden looked shocked, but Madison squealed excitedly. Really? I was hoping you'd marry him. Does that mean we get to move to the ranch? Brittany groaned. She hadn't been thinking about Madison, as boy crazy as she was, moving to the ranch with 30 boys. Yes, we're moving to the ranch, but you are not going to spend all your time following those boys around. Why not? Madison asked. It'll be summer vacation soon, and what will I have to do that's better than that? Brittany rubbed the back of her neck, already tired. The wedding will be on Friday night during their barbecue. Madison, you're standing up with me, so find your prettiest dress. Do I get a new dress? Please. You know we don't have money for a new dress. Brittany sighed. We'll be living in the big house, and Lillian and Peter are moving out. But I don't want you two to take advantage of the situation. Are you going to keep working? Madison asked. I haven't decided yet. I know I won't work for much longer, but I don't know yet if I'm going to start staying home right away. I might be needed to. Lillian is already talking about me taking over the barbecue. You're a good cook, Caden said encouragingly. I think you could do it. Probably, Brittany said. It's just a big job, and I know she spends a couple of days per week working on it. It might be too much for me to do while I'm working as well. She was wondering how they would feel about her staying home, or if they'd prefer she kept working. Madison grinned. If you stay home, you could bake cookies like Lillian does. Wouldn't you love to have cookies waiting for me every day when I got home from school? Brittany laughed. You and your sweet tooth. You need to talk to Caleb's wife, Natalie. She's the candy maker, right? I would love to talk to her. I wonder if she's hiring summer help. Madison had just turned 16, and she was obsessed with getting a job so she could get a car. Caden was 2 years younger than Madison. I don't know, but she can't hire you. You'd eat all the profits. Madison giggled. Probably. She looked around her. Wait, if we're moving to the ranch, that means we have to pack up this whole house. That's going to take forever. It's not going to be quick and easy, that's for sure, Brittany said with a frown. I picked up some boxes on my way home from work. I want at least 10 boxes packed by each of you tonight, and I'll do the same. She wasn't sure how she was going to be able to work that week and still get the house packed up. Both kids groaned. Where are the boxes? Caden asked. In my car. She handed him the keys. Look in the trunk. He went to get boxes, but Madison hung back. I don't want to leave. This is where we lived with Mom and Dad. Their parents had been dead for 8 years, and Mom and Dad were fading from her younger siblings' minds, and Brittany knew it. We'll take photo albums. No matter what, we can't stay here. Brittany didn't mention the back taxes. She had no idea why they'd been allowed to stay as long as they had. Somehow they must have fallen through the system, but she wasn't complaining. They'd needed this time to live without rent. Madison nodded, seeming to understand her sister's unspoken words. I can't wait to live at the McClain's house. They have the best place. Will they let us ride horses? Brittany shrugged. I imagine they will. We'll be members of the family after Friday night. She didn't let her panic show at her words. She was in love, and she was getting married, but he could never know she was in love with him. It would give him too much power over her. Madison jumped to her feet with a grin. I can't wait. Me neither. Brittany sat for a moment, staring at the wall. After all the wedding arrangements they'd made that day, now she needed to pack all night long. How on earth was she going to get through all of it? She had no idea. Just before she went to bed that evening, she got a call from Gideon. Hello? He'd called her often over the years. Friends did that. Hey, you. Did you tell the kids? His deep voice sent shivers through her, as it always had. Yeah. We're going to have to watch Madison. She was so excited about living at the ranch, and then it connected for me. We will have a boy-crazy girl with 30 teenage boys. He groaned. We'll make it work. I'll start looking online for a chastity belt now. She laughed softly. I have a feeling we'd have to fight her to put that thing on her. I can see that. He yawned. Are you going to be able to work tomorrow? Or do you have too much to do? She bit her lip. I could work half the day. Let's do that then. You work the morning, and I'll work in the afternoon. They had me going to Taco Bueno for a mid-afternoon snack today. Is that normal? She laughed. Not usually, but Tiffany is a huge Taco Bueno fan. If I'm running an errand already, she will sometimes ask me to go. Yeah, that's how it was. He sighed. I'm looking forward to Friday. I can't wait until you're my wife. She smiled. I'm looking forward to being done with everything I have to do before the wedding. I can understand that. Don't let my mom make things too elaborate for you. It's your wedding, not hers. He paused for a moment. Are you going to let the men wear cowboy boots and jeans? Or do I have to try and get myself a tux? You wore a tux to our prom. You looked very handsome. They'd broken up well before prom, but they'd gone as friends. They were too comfortable together to worry about finding other dates. Please don't make me wear a tux. Fine. You can wear jeans. I'm wearing my mother's wedding dress, and I'll find something for Madison to wear. I think she can wear the dress she wore to homecoming. If you need money to make this work, you just let me know. She shook her head, even though she knew he couldn't see her. No, that's fine. You're doing enough for us. After they'd hung up, she laid in bed staring at the ceiling. How was she going to live with him and never let on that she loved him? Chapter 4. The rest of Brittany's week followed a similar pattern. She worked every morning, had lunch with Gideon and Lillian to talk wedding plans, and packed in the afternoons. She was exhausted by Friday morning, but she enjoyed her lunch with Gideon, because he spent the whole time lamenting over how hard her job was. As she listened, she hid a chuckle. Finally, when he came up for air, she asked, "Would you really be okay if I gave my notice? I'd feel like a wastrel sitting around, but after listening to all of the duties I'm expected to perform as your wife, I'm not sure if I'd be busier than I am now, but probably." He smiled. "I think that's the right answer. And just so you know, Mom goes a bit overboard with some of her duties. She doesn't have to make cookies and take them around to all the boys every week. She doesn't have to have special days with some of the boys who aren't feeling well. It's all her choice." Brittany looked at Lillian, who shrugged. "I do the things my mother-in-law did before me. I came into my marriage with my eyes wide open, knowing I was in for some years of hard work, whether I kept an outside job or not." Brittany nodded. She was looking at things the same way Lillian had. "I'm happy to take over the tasks that I can. I may make it easier on myself down the road, but I'm not sure yet." "I think you should get a nanny," Lillian said. "When I started having babies every 14 months, I was sure that it was my job to do everything myself. Looking back, I can tell you a nanny would have been very smart. Adam's birthday is in September, and I had 4 kids who weren't in school yet when I brought Ephraim home from the hospital. 3 in diapers, counting Ephraim. I spent years physically, mentally, and emotionally exhausted. If I'd used my head at all, I'd have hired a nanny. I could have always focused on the baby during the day, and spent my evenings with the others." Brittany's eyes widened. "I guess it never occurred to me how close in age the boys were. I was even on birth control. Nothing stopped the birth of those babies. Nothing at all." Lillian shook her head. "You need to quit your job and start searching for a nanny. Or a cook. Or a maid. Or all 3. Brittany looked at Gideon, trying to see how he felt about his mother's words, but he had a stoic expression on his face. "Am I ready for 7 babies?" Lillian laughed. "I don't think that matters. If you marry Gideon, you'll get them." Gideon frowned at his mother. "Don't say if and stop trying to scare her. We're getting married in," he looked at his watch quickly, 5 hours. "It's happening." Oh, Brittany wouldn't back out at this point. "She loves you too much." At the mention of the word love, Brittany and Gideon looked away from each other. Lillian didn't know about their reason for marrying, and as far as Brittany was concerned, she didn't need to. "I picked some bluebonnets today," Brittany said to change the subject. "I'm not sure the best way to arrange them, but they're picked." Gideon nodded, happy for the topic change. "Is everything packed? Are you ready to move?" They decided that Madison and Caden would spend the weekend with his parents, and the 2 of them would sleep at her house until Monday. His dad would help Frank with the kids as needed. Brittany shrugged. "Yeah, I think so. We need to do an estate sale next weekend, so we can get all the furniture out of there. Anything that we can't sell, we'll donate. We're not going to need that much furniture after we marry." "Sounds smart." He was sure ready to be done with her job. "How much notice will you give Adam?" "I'll do 2 weeks. That should give Adam enough time to find someone to take my place." "You're irreplaceable," Gideon told her with a grin. "Yeah, that's what Adam keeps telling me. He's kind of driving me crazy. I need to quit, but I feel like I owe the McClains so much after you all gave me a job that allowed for me to keep my brother and sister with me." "You owe us nothing," Lillian said. "You're marrying Gideon." "It's not like no one else would have me," Gideon said. He was tired of people acting like she was doing something so noble by marrying him. He wasn't a troll. Lillian simply swatted his arm and carried on. The duties you're taking on are not easy ones, but I have a feeling you're more than up for the task. Brittany nodded. I have a good example to follow. And you'll have a good man at your side, Lillian said. Gideon took Brittany's hand in his. I will do anything I can to make it easier for you. Thank you, Brittany said, looking at Gideon's deep, blue-gray eyes. All of the McClain men had such an unusual eye color. She was happy to know her children would inherit it, because apparently that's something they all got from their father as well. Gideon walked her out after lunch. Anything I can do to help? Just keep covering for me at work. I know it's a pain in the butt, but I don't think there's any way I could work and still do everything that needs to be done. Gideon leaned down and kissed her softly, making her heart beat rapidly. I'm only a phone call away if you need me. Otherwise, I'll see you at the barbecue tonight. She took deep breaths to try to still her panic at the thought. In just a few hours, she would be married to him, and to her, that meant a lifetime. How was she going to be able to handle being in love with her husband who had no feelings at all for her? Was it even possible? Gideon watched her drive off, thankful their wedding day was finally there. He sensed that she still had reservations, but he planned on forcing his way through every reservation as quickly as possible. He would make it work. Asterisk. Brittany felt silly when she pulled her little beat-up car into the parking lot of the ranch. She wore her mother's wedding dress, which wasn't terribly formal, and her sister wore her dress from homecoming, but thankfully she'd left the mum at home. In Texas, a homecoming mum completely covered the top half of the girl, with streamers going to her feet. They were definitely not meant for weddings. As soon as she was out of the car, Frank approached her, hugging her quickly. Welcome to the family. Brittany looked into his face, laughter on hers. She whispered, I know why Gideon sent you over here. You're calming me down. But that's okay, 'cause it's working. Frank had always been one of her favorite McClains. She had no feelings for him like she did for Gideon, and it was easy to just be his friend. He grinned, turning to walk back to the crowd, but she grabbed his arm. Oh, no you don't. You're walking down the aisle with my sister. Stay right here keeping us calm. Frank grinned, winking at her. She wasn't sure if his ability to calm was really a power or just his laid-back personality. Either way, it was helping. Madison walked to him and put her hand on his arm. How long until we walk down the aisle? She asked, obviously excited to become part of this family she'd admired for so long. I don't know. When the music plays, we walk. That's what my mom told me, and I was supposed to relay that message, but it seems I'm part of the whole wedding party now, whether I'd planned to be or not. You're stuck with us, all right, Brittany told him, turning to look for Caden. I know you feel stupid, but you're walking me down the aisle. I don't have a father, and you're my only brother, so you're it. Caden wrinkled his nose. Fine. I'm going to give you away. Does that mean I'm done with you? Don't be rude, Cade. You're my favorite brother, after all. He just rolled his eyes, but he stood with her, waiting for the music to start. Once it did, Frank and Madison walked slowly up the aisle. Brittany could see that Madison was looking around at all the boys from the ranch, trying to figure out which one she'd be most interested in. They all went to her school, so it wasn't like any of them were new to her. Once Madison and Frank had reached the front, she took Caden's arm and started walking beside him. Walk slow now. I'm going to trip over this dress and fall flat on my face. Neither of us want that to happen. Caden shrugged. Might be good for a laugh. Brittany sighed. She could see her brother laughing at that. Hush. You were the one who talked first. When they got to the front where the pastor waited for them, Brittany took the hand Gideon held out for her, feeling a sense of calm wash over her. She felt like she was coming home. She wasn't sure if it was Gideon or Frank using the calming power, but she didn't care at that moment. She was just happy to be marrying the man she loved. And absolutely petrified to be marrying the man she loved, but that was fading away. The ceremony was short and sweet, because everyone was hungry. When the pastor said, "You may now kiss the bride," Gideon pulled her to him, wrapped his arms around her, and kissed her for all he was worth. When he raised his head for a breath, she looked up at him through the veil of her lashes, wondering what on earth had just happened to her. "We're married," she said softly, and Gideon nodded. "We are, and I couldn't be happier about it. I've wanted to make you my wife for years and years." She smiled at him, wondering if he'd have said the same thing if destiny didn't force them to be together. Either way, she decided she was going to have a happy night. She would only marry once, so this would be her only wedding reception. She was going to be the happiest woman alive for the next couple of hours. They filled their plates with the food Lillian and Claire had worked so hard to make, and then the two of them headed for one of the tables. When there was a wedding, they brought an irregular table so the bride wouldn't have to climb onto a picnic table in her dress. The McClains thought of everything. At the table with her was each of the other McClain brothers and their brides, along with Gideon, of course. Claire reached out and grabbed her hand. "I'm here to help with the barbecues." "Good. I'll need it," Brittany said, shaking her head. She was doing her best to feel happy and not drown under the enormity of the responsibilities in front of her. She looked at Adam. "You know you're my favorite boss, right? I also know you're quitting. You feel too guilty for it to be anything else." She laughed. "I should have known you'd already know." Tiffany smiled at her sweetly. "I think you're going to be really happy you made that decision. I just hope you'll stick around long enough to train someone to take your place." "You don't think Gideon should take the job full-time?" Brittany asked, hiding her grin from her new husband. "No. Absolutely not. I'd rather be on hand-washing diaper duty for the rest of my life." Brittany shook her head. "There will be no hand-washed diapers. If I'm having 7 kids, there will be Pampers for everyone. I don't care if you need to get 3 jobs to pay for them." Gideon frowned. Had he forgotten to talk to her about the family's finances when he'd filled her in on everything else? "We'll talk about all of that later." As they ate, they all laughed and joked, and Brittany felt more and more like these people would really be a family to her. Her new sisters were already giving her good advice. Her new brothers were acting as if she'd been a part of their family forever, which really, in a way, she had. Working for the ranch was just like being a member of the family. She did her best to keep an eye on her younger siblings, but lost sight of them often. When she finally found Madison in the crowd later that evening, she saw that she was sitting between Michael and Jose, 2 of the boys who were currently in Gideon's house. "Is she safe with those 2? Brittany asked, immediately feeling badly, because she remembered Maria, Ephraim's wife, was also Michael's sister. Maria shrugged. "She's safe with Michael. Not sure about Jose. I don't know him super well yet." "Sorry," Brittany said. "That was rude of me." "No, it wasn't. I'd have worried about the same thing if it was my kid sister." Maria shrugged. "There aren't usually a lot of girls on the ranch, and the boys do tend to be drawn to the ones who are here." "They're fine," Gideon told her. "Besides, Mom has an eye on the situation. She's not going to allow anything to happen to Madison or Caden. She's responsible for the 2 of them tonight, and she takes that type of responsibility very seriously." "So I can quit worrying about them?" Gideon nodded. "Definitely stop worrying. For the next couple of nights, Mom will take care of them. You only need to worry about being married and being happy. When was the last time you had a chance to worry about only yourself and not your younger siblings?" She thought about his question for a moment. "Not since 2008, when my parents died." "Now's the time, then, isn't it?" Chapter 5. After the reception, Brittany met Lillian at the car, along with both her siblings, to give them all their things they'd packed for the night. Then Gideon led her to his truck, opening the door for her. I have my suitcase for the next couple of nights in the back. I'll have to be at work when the boys wake up Monday morning. She looked at him for a moment. How do you stand it? I know you're not an early riser. I hate it. I can't really take naps usually, but every once in a while, I work one in. He shrugged. I do what I need to do. What do you do all day? When you're not bothering Adam, that is? I'll have you know I was never there to bother Adam. I was looking for an excuse to see you. She shook her head. You were not. I was too. He turned off the ranch's main road and onto the highway. And what do I do all day? It depends. Some days, Ephraim needs help with the animals, and I'm the logical choice, because I can talk to them too. Sometimes Benjamin needs help, and I'm the logical choice there, too. I really have never become specialized in any one thing, but I help out wherever I need to. Do you like that? Brittany had always thought of Gideon as someone who wasn't incredibly important in one place, but she thought she understood. He was needed all over. I do. It means that I can be absent a little more than my brothers, but I have the ability to fill in anywhere. I'm not as good as any of them at their own powers, but I can do things mostly as well. He paused, frowning for a moment. You may have the wrong idea about our family's financial state. What does that mean? I know you do a fundraiser every year. Did the fundraiser help more than she realized? Remember how I said my dad is a precog? Well, he sometimes is given the vision of lottery numbers, and we always buy a ticket. We've never won the big pot, but we win a couple $100,000 here and there. He sighed. We don't do the fundraisers to make money for the ranch. They're mostly a smokescreen, and we put the money we get into trust funds for the boys. They all graduate, thinking they're broke, but they have very good trust funds when they're done with school. She blinked a couple of times. Why didn't you tell me? He shrugged. I didn't think of it with you asking me to grow silk flowers, and if I knew where Jimmy Hoffa was buried. Fair point. She knew she'd been silly that day, but she'd felt very uncomfortable at that lunch. I'm sorry if I made it hard on you. It was fine. You were trying to add a little levity to a situation that was weighing heavily on me. He pulled into her driveway and parked the truck, running around to open her door. He offered her a hand, worried she'd trip with her long dress. Have I mentioned yet today how beautiful you look? Because stunning doesn't begin to cover it. She smiled, looking deeply into his blue-gray eyes. And you were incredibly handsome. I appreciate that you wore clean clothes. He made a face. Someday you're going to stop teasing me all the time. And I'm going to call the coroner. Wait, you can't heal me if I start to die? He shook his head emphatically. I'm pretty good with small injuries. I'm not even very good at mending broken bones. We leave that stuff to Daniel. But if you cut your thumb, I'm the man to see. She grinned at him, resting her hands on his shoulders. Thank you for coming to the rescue of my family. I hope you know that I'll be eternally grateful. Her gratitude wasn't exactly what he wanted. If she'd said he'd have her undying love, that would have made him a great deal happier. No gratitude is necessary. Just your love. He opened the back door and grabbed his suitcase. I really could take you to a nice hotel in Austin or San Antonio. No need. I still have a lot to do in the house anyway. I may even put you to work. On my honey weekend? Honey weekend? What on earth is a honey weekend? I would take a honeymoon if I could, and that would span an entire moon, or a month. I only get a honey weekend, so I'm going to take advantage of every minute. She laughed softly, shaking her head. I'm never going to understand how your mind works, Gideon McClain. That's probably best for everyone. He waited while she unlocked the door, before carrying his suitcase in. He would wait to carry her over the threshold until he had her at the home where they'd raise their own sons. "Where should I put this?" he asked. He was surprised to realize that though he'd picked her up at her home many times, he'd never been inside. "I thought I'd put you in Caden's room for the weekend. Down the hall and last door on your right." She went into her own room, looking for her favorite pair of comfortable pajamas. She had to get out of her wedding dress or she just might die. Thankfully, working on the ranch meant comfortable clothes if that's what she wanted to wear. Gideon stopped in the middle of the hall and set down his suitcase. "What do you mean you're putting me in Caden's room for the weekend?" She popped her head out of her room. "I didn't think you'd want Madison's room. It's all covered in pink, and there might be some unicorns on the ceiling. Not your thing at all. We're married. Doesn't that mean we sleep together?" What on earth was she thinking? She stared at him for a moment, blinking rapidly as she tried to come to grips with the situation. "But we're friends. You married me as your friend." Gideon wasn't quite sure where her thoughts had come from. He walked into the room she was in, obviously her bedroom, and sat down on the bed, patting the spot beside him. Once she was settled, he did his best to formulate his thoughts into sentences. "You married me knowing that we would have 7 children. Did you think we were going to look for medical intervention for those miracle babies?" She sighed. "No, but I thought we'd take some time to get more comfortable with each other." "More comfortable with each other? You've been my best friend since junior high. How could we be more comfortable with each other?" Her reasoning was making no sense to him, and he was starting to get a bit worked up. "Maybe you should use your calming power on yourself. I figured we would be looking at each other differently, and we'd each need time to get used to our new roles in each other's lives." Gideon ran his fingers through his hair. "We're married. There was a time when we almost made love in the backseat of my car, pulling back just in time. And now you're telling me you need time to get comfortable with me?" He took a deep breath and expelled it, doing his best not to get angry with her. "How long do you think you need? We're never again going to have time alone like this." She frowned at that. "Maybe it would be easier if we were totally alone like we are now." She hadn't considered that he planned to consummate the marriage so soon. "I have to have a little while to wrap my mind around this." "I can understand that." He didn't want to upset her, but he really didn't want to wait either. "Why don't you get changed into something comfortable, and I'll do the same. We'll watch a movie together and snuggle on the couch. See what happens from there?" She bit her lip before nodding slowly. "I can deal with that. I think it's a good compromise." Gideon sighed, getting to his feet. "I'll go put on a pair of shorts and meet you in the living room." He turned back to her. "Do you need help getting out of that thing?" She stood and turned her back to him. "If you wouldn't mind unzipping me, that would be awesome. The thing about wedding dresses is there's no way to get in and out of them by yourself." "Who got you into that thing?" he asked. Brittany felt the dress ease behind her, and she wanted to wiggle free, but he was still there. "Madison helped me, and someday I'll help her. It's the way of the sisters. You have 7 sisters now." He closed the door behind him with a soft click, grabbing his suitcase to get his shorts. He contemplated leaving it in the middle of the hallway for them to trip over in protest of her wanting to wait, but decided that would not only be childish, but he wouldn't have any clothes to put on. He changed into a pair of stretchy shorts and a t-shirt, after discarding the idea of going shirtless. If she was already nervous, then it wouldn't be a good idea to run around half naked in front of her, no matter how much he wanted to. He walked into the living room and turned the television on, sifting through the movies on her shelf. He grinned when he found 7 Brides for 7 Brothers among her DVDs, and he popped it into the DVD player. He'd seen it enough to have it memorized, and he had a feeling she had as well. He sat quietly waiting for her, playing a stupid game on his phone. Phone games were always stupid in his opinion, but he was always sucked into one or two of them. When she joined him a few minutes later, she'd brushed her hair out, freeing it from those things that held it up on the sides. He didn't know what they were called, but he was glad she'd taken them out of her hair. He loved how she looked, with her red hair flowing over her shoulders and down her back. She walked over and sat beside him on the couch, curling her legs under her. She'd chosen her most comfortable pair of flannel pajamas, and she refused to worry if he'd find her sexy. She had to hold out on having sex for as long as she possibly could, because she knew she'd feel closer to him once they made love. She couldn't risk her heart that way. "What are we watching?" Brittany asked. "I thought we'd go with a classic." Gideon pushed the button to start the movie as he put his arm around her. She giggled as it came on. "Do you have any idea how many times I've watched this over the years? When we were in junior high and first became friends, I couldn't help but think about how this movie was tied to you, so I watched it again and again. I thought one day I'd walk up to you and sing the song Millie sings while she's picking sorrel for the nourishing soup she wants to make for her wedding night, and you'd just fall in love with me." He grinned. "You never sang it for me." "I never had the guts." She shrugged. "Then you asked me out all on your own without me ever singing the song to you, which was probably for the best for both of us, and then you broke it off. You never told me why, though." He sighed. If she wanted to have this discussion now, then he'd have it now. It didn't feel like the right time to him, but whatever she wanted. He paused the movie and put the remote onto the end table beside him, turning to her fully on the couch and taking her hands in his. Her green eyes had always made him feel like he was drowning. "I'm happy to tell you. I think I told you a little bit at the diner when I asked you to marry me, but if you want more, I'll give it to you." She nodded, refusing to back down. This was something she needed to know to be able to trust him again. Well, she did trust him, but only as a friend. Not as a romantic interest. "Tell me." He took a deep breath, drawing the courage to have this conversation from within. He sent out a calming aura, hoping she wouldn't notice. "No tricks now, Gideon. No tricks." "So much for that." She was on to him. "I had a crush on you from the day you hit me over the head with your books. I still don't know why you did it, but I know I went home and told my whole family about you. I was over the moon. We became good friends, and time after time I tried to ask you out, but I couldn't get up the courage." She nodded. "I know you were shy with me a lot. I mean, mostly we were friends, but there were times when you'd blush, and I'd get all excited thinking maybe you were finally going to ask me out." "Really?" He shook his head. "I was such a dork. Anyway, when I finally got up the guts to ask you out, and we dated for what? 2 or 3 months at least, I think. Every single time we went out, I felt more and more connected to you. I felt like you had to be my destined wife, because even though you only heard about that this week, it's something I've known about since I was a little boy." She nodded. "I can understand that. Well, my dad never told me you were my destined wife. I'd talk about you, hoping he'd share that information with me, and he'd just tell me to be careful not to fall too hard too fast. He'd talk about how I needed time to figure out who I was before I became half of a couple." "So you thought that meant that we weren't meant to be together?" Brittany frowned, but she could see where that would be hard. "I did. And I thought if I got closer to you, my heart might just explode, because my feelings for you were so strong. And every time we were together, we were pushing boundaries. We wanted things that both of us felt were wrong, and we both knew we were too young for." He looked down at their hands for a moment, gathering his words. When he started speaking again, he was looking into her eyes. "So I broke it off with you. I felt like the longer we were together, the more danger we'd be in of crossing that line. And I knew the more time we spent together, the less chance there was that I would survive the breakup that had to come for me to marry the woman I was destined to marry. She nodded. I honestly understand that. You do? You don't hate me? I could never hate you, Gideon. The problem is that I'm not sure I can trust you romantically. I trust you as my friend, of course, but I can't trust you not to break my heart again.